As a detective, I had the power to arrest, to slap on handcuffs, even to draw my gun if the law was broken. But standing there in my own home, watching my husband and my niece tangled together in betrayal, I realized there are crimes the law can't touch, and wounds no badge can protect you from. I was supposed to be a surprise. After 3 days at a law enforcement symposium in Seattle, I decided to come home early to celebrate our 7th wedding anniversary, 7 years with Brian, what we jokingly called our lucky number. 7. The irony of that phrase would haunt me for months to come. The flight landed at 2:14 p.m., 2 hours ahead of the time I'd told Brian to expect me. I imagined his face lighting up when I walked through the door, imagined the way his arms would fold around me like they always did. The taxi driver asked if I was heading home from vacation, and I remember smiling as I told him, "No, I'm heading to one." Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Rainier Heights, the dream home we'd purchased 3 years ago after I made detective in the Seattle Police Department, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and more bedrooms than we needed. Room to grow, Brian had said with that hopeful smile of his. I paid the driver, wheeled my carry-on up the stone path, and used my key to unlock the front door. The house was quiet, but not empty quiet. There was that lived-in silence, the kind where you can feel someone's presence even before you see them. I called out Brian's name, but no response came. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. Walking through the foyer, I noticed 2 wine glasses on the coffee table in the living room. One had a lipstick mark, bright red, a shade I never wore. My heart began to pound, but my mind raced to rational explanations. Perhaps a colleague had stopped by. Maybe he was planning something for our anniversary. Then I heard it. Laughter coming from upstairs, a woman's laughter, light and breathy, followed by Brian's low chuckle. The sound I used to love now turned my blood to ice. Moving up the stairs felt like wading through concrete, each step heavier than the last. I recognized the second voice before I even reached the landing. Hannah, my sister's 24-year-old daughter, my niece, the girl who had spent summers with us since she was 16. The girl who called me Aunt Jessica, and who had cried on my shoulder last Christmas after her boyfriend broke up with her. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. Through the gap, I could see them on our bed, my bed. Brian's hands tangled in her long, honey-brown hair. She had dyed it to match mine at one point, something we'd laughed about during family dinners. They didn't hear me over their own sounds. I pushed the door open. It swung silently on its hinges, giving me a full view of my husband and my niece locked in an embrace that shattered my world. My breath caught painfully in my chest, each beat of my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the muffled moans and laughter still echoing in the room. My vision blurred for a moment. Black spots dancing at the edges as a wave of dizziness washed over me. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire. A searing pain that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers gripping the handle of my carry-on. A silent scream built in my throat, stuck behind clenched teeth, as the undeniable reality of what I was seeing settled like a weight I couldn't lift. It took 3 seconds for them to notice me, 3 eternal seconds where I stood frozen, my carry-on handle still in my grip, watching what couldn't possibly be real. Hannah saw me first. Her eyes widened, her mouth formed a perfect O of horror. Brian turned, and the look on his face, shock, guilt, but not enough remorse, told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been happening. "Jessica," he started, scrambling to cover himself with the sheets. Our sheets, the Egyptian cotton ones I'd splurged on for our anniversary last year. "Aunt Jessica," Hannah's voice cracked. She was crying now, tears streaking her mascara. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I simply closed the door and walked back downstairs. Behind me, I heard frantic movement. Brian calling my name, Hannah sobbing. I walked to the kitchen, set my purse on the counter, and poured myself a glass of water. When Brian came downstairs, hastily dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, his face was flushed with more than just embarrassment. He approached me like I was a wild animal that might attack. "Jessica, please. Let me explain how long." My voice sounded strange, detached, like it belonged to someone else. "It's not what you think. How long?" Not a question this time. He ran his hands through his hair, the nervous gesture I once found endearing. 6 months. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It just happened, Jess. We never meant to. She's my niece, Jessica, my sister's daughter. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. Hannah, practically a child. She's 24, he said defensively, as if that made it better. Hannah appeared at the kitchen doorway, fully dressed now, her eyes red and swollen. Aunt Jessica, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't call me that anymore. You're not my niece from this moment forward. Her face crumpled, and for a second I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Where will you go? Brian asked, reaching for me. I stepped back, his fingers grazing my arm like a burn. I'm not going anywhere. I said. This is my house too. My name is on the mortgage. You two are leaving. Jessica, be reasonable. You have 30 minutes to pack what you need for tonight. Tomorrow, when I'm at work, you can come back for more of your things. But tonight, you're both leaving. Brian's face hardened. You can't just throw me out of my own house. Legally? Legally. I laughed. A horrible, brittle sound. You want to talk about rights after I just caught you in bed with my niece? In our bed, on our anniversary? I stepped closer to him. Try me, Brian. See what happens if you don't walk out that door in the next half hour. A storm of emotions raged beneath my calm words. Rage so white-hot it made my hands tremble. Grief so heavy it felt like my ribs were cracking from the inside, and a dark, hollow ache where love used to be. I wanted to scream until the walls shook, to break every fragile thing in sight, but I forced myself to stay still, to let the icy mask of control settle over me. It was the only thing keeping me from falling apart in front of them. He must have seen something in my eyes, something that told him I wasn't bluffing. He nodded slowly and moved past me toward the stairs. Hannah lingered, tears streaming down her face. I never meant for this to happen. I love him. The words hit me like a physical blow. Love. She thought this was love. Get out of my sight, I whispered, and tell your mother what you've done or I will. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded into evening. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I found myself thinking with a clarity I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation on an epic scale. They had made me into a fool, probably laughing behind my back for months. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of building this home, countless family gatherings where they must have exchanged glances while I remained oblivious. The thought of it made bile rise in my throat. I picked up my phone and stared at it. I could call my sister, devastate her with the news of her daughter's betrayal. I could call our friends, expose Brian for the cheater he was. I could burn it all down right now with a few phone calls. But something stopped me. A thought, cold and clear. Revenge served hot was satisfying, but revenge served cold would be devastating. I set down the phone and walked upstairs to our bedroom. I stripped the bed, stuffing the sheets into a garbage bag. Then I opened my laptop and began to plan, because if there was one thing I'd learned in my career as a homicide detective, it was how to dismantle a problem piece by piece until nothing remained. Brian and Hannah had no idea what was coming. They thought today was the worst day of their lives. They were wrong. That day hadn't arrived yet, but it would, and I would be the one to bring it. The next morning, I woke up on the guest room bed, my mind surprisingly clear. The initial shock had crystallized into something harder, sharper. I checked my phone. 17 missed calls from Brian, 5 from Hannah, and 3 from my sister Lauren, so Hannah had told her mother after all, or some version of the truth. I wasn't ready to hear any of it. Instead, I called my precinct and requested 2 weeks of unused vacation time, effective immediately. My captain, concerned by the unusual request, asked if everything was all right. Family emergency, I said simply. I need time to handle some personal matters. Next, I texted Brian. I'll be staying at the house. I need time alone. Don't contact me for 2 weeks. His response came immediately. Jessica, please, we need to talk about this. I made a terrible mistake. Can we meet somewhere, coffee, neutral ground? I didn't respond. There was nothing to discuss, nothing to salvage. What I needed now was information and distance to execute my plan. First step, reconnaissance. I logged into our shared accounts, credit cards, bank statements, email. Brian and I had always maintained transparency with passwords, a trust exercise that would now serve a different purpose. What I found confirmed my suspicions. dinner reservations for two at places we'd never been together, hotel charges in the city on days he'd claimed to work late, gifts purchased that I'd never received. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. But in the quiet moments between each revelation, a suffocating doubt curled around my mind. What if I was wrong? What if I couldn't bring him down? The fear of failure pressed like a weight on my chest, whispering that maybe I was out of my depth, that I was grasping at control I couldn't hold. Each time I pushed it away, but the unease lingered, a shadow I couldn't entirely shake. This wasn't just an affair with my niece. It was an elaborate double life. The precision of his deception infuriated me. How carefully he'd hidden the evidence, how meticulously he'd maintained the facade of our marriage while building something else behind my back. I downloaded everything, organized it chronologically, and saved multiple copies, evidence, ammunition. Then I moved to the legal front. Without officially engaging an attorney, I consulted with 3 of the city's top divorce lawyers, effectively conflicting them out for Brian. I learned about our state's equitable distribution laws, about hidden asset investigations, about the divorce process itself. Knowledge was power, and I was arming myself. By day 5, I'd created a detailed map of Brian's infidelity. It wasn't just Hannah. There had been others, not simultaneously but serially, a pattern of conquest and deception that spanned most of our marriage. Each revelation should have devastated me further, but instead it hardened my resolve. The most painful discovery came when I accessed Brian's cloud storage, photos of him and Hannah together. Not just intimate photos, but everyday moments, coffee shops, parks, weekends away, an entire relationship documented while I traveled for work or visited my parents. In some, they were wearing matching bracelets, thin silver bands with an inscription I couldn't make out. I checked our credit card statements again and found the purchase. 2 custom silver bracelets from an artisan jeweler downtown, bought 3 months ago, the day after our 6th anniversary. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but from rage. The depth of their betrayal went beyond physical infidelity. They had built an entire relationship in the shadow of my marriage, celebrating their own milestones while mocking mine. The next phase of my plan required more delicate maneuvering. I reached out to Lauren, asking to meet for coffee. Her voice on the phone was strained, uncertain. "Jessica, I don't know what to say. Hannah told me everything. I'm so ashamed, so horrified." "Not over the phone," I interrupted. "Let's talk in person, just us." We met at a cafe across town, far from our usual spots. Lauren looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes rimmed red, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "I never thought she could do something like this," she said, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. "I raised her better than this. I've told her she's no longer welcome in my home until she makes this right, if that's even possible." I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine pain there. "What exactly did she tell you?" Lauren looked surprised. "That she and Brian have been involved for months, that you caught them together, that she's in love with him." She choked on the last words. "Jessica, if I had any idea? Did she tell you it was in my bed, on my anniversary?" I kept my voice even, watching the horror spread across her face. "Oh God, no, she didn't." "Jessica, I don't know what to say." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not responsible for her actions, but I need to know if you're with me or not." "With you? Of course I'm with you. She's my daughter, but what she did, it's unforgivable." I squeezed her hand. "Then, I need your help." Over the next hour, I outlined part of my plan. Not everything, just enough to secure her cooperation. Lauren listened, occasionally wiping tears, but ultimately nodding in agreement. "They humiliated you," she said finally. "They deserve whatever comes next." Back at home, I moved to the financial aspects of my strategy. Brian and I had built substantial savings over the years, investments that had grown steadily with the market. I didn't touch our joint accounts. That would come later through legal channels. But I did explore his separate financial activities. What I found was illuminating. Brian had been siphoning money into a separate account for the past year. Not large amounts that would trigger my notice, but consistent transfers that had accumulated to a significant sum, preparing for a future without me, or setting up a nest for him and Hannah. Either way, it was evidence of premeditation, of calculated deception, rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. I documented everything, adding it to my growing file. By the 10th day, my plan was comprehensive. I'd identified Brian's vulnerabilities, professional, financial, social, and mapped out a strategy that would dismantle each one systematically, not in a burst of vindictive fury, but through careful, legal, and ultimately devastating maneuvers that would leave him with nothing but the consequences of his choices. As for Hannah, my approach would be different. Her betrayal cut deeper in some ways, family turning against family, youth betraying trust. Her punishment would be more subtle, but perhaps more lasting, a systematic dismantling of her self-image as the victim, as the one who had fallen in love rather than deliberately betrayed her aunt. On the final day of my self-imposed isolation, I sat in our home office, surrounded by files, notes, and strategically organized evidence. I'd barely slept, running on a mixture of determination and cold fury that kept exhaustion at bay. Brian had stopped calling after the first week, his messages shifting from desperate pleas to angry demands for adult conversation. Hannah continued to text daily, her messages evolving from tearful apologies to defensive justifications of their love. I read her latest message before deleting it. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you can't help who you fall in love with. I hope someday you'll understand that what Brian and I have is real." I set down the phone and smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. They thought they knew what was coming: a divorce, family drama, perhaps some social embarrassment. They had no idea of the precision with which I was about to dismantle their entire world. Tomorrow marked the end of my planning phase and the beginning of execution. I closed my laptop, stretched my stiff muscles, and walked to the master bedroom. Now stripped of all traces of Brian, redecorated and reclaimed as my own space. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had walked in on her husband and niece 2 weeks ago. Her eyes were harder, her posture straighter. She looked dangerous. Good, I thought, because I am. The first strike came without warning on Monday morning, exactly 15 days after the discovery. I walked into Brian's engineering firm wearing a tailored black suit and carrying a portfolio of documents. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Harris, so nice to see you. Is Brian expecting you?" "No." I smiled warmly. "I'm actually here to see Samuel Whitaker, the firm's founding partner and Brian's mentor." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Samuel in his corner office, watching his expression shift from confusion to shock to quiet fury, as I methodically presented evidence of Brian's misappropriation of company resources. For months, he had been using the firm's specialized software and billable hours to work on private projects. Side jobs he kept off the books, pocketing the money while using company time and resources. I discovered this while going through our finances, I explained, my voice steady. With our divorce pending, I needed clarity on our assets. What I found instead was troubling. Samuel removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Jessica, I don't know what to say. This is a serious breach of company policy and professional ethics. I know, and I'm sorry to be the one to bring this to you. Brian was always so proud of his position here, of your mentorship. Does Brian know you're here today?" I shook my head. "No, and I'd prefer he didn't find out from me." Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly. "You have my word. And Jessica, thank you for your integrity in this matter. Not many would do what you're doing, especially under the circumstances." As I left Samuel's office, a dark, quiet satisfaction curled low in my stomach. Every step through the pristine hallways of the firm felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. Brian had chipped away over years of subtle lies and empty promises. My hands were steady, but inside, a storm of adrenaline and grief crashed together, a twisted rush of empowerment mingled with raw hurt. I left the building knowing the wheels were in motion. By afternoon, Brian would be called into a meeting he wasn't prepared for, facing accusations backed by irrefutable evidence. His professional reputation, the thing he valued most after his own ego, would be the first casualty. Phase 2 began that same afternoon. I met with our mutual friends, Sarah and Michael, for lunch. They'd been awkwardly silent since the news broke, unsure where their loyalties should lie in the dissolution of a 7-year friendship quartet. "I'll understand if you need to maintain your friendship with Brian," I said, stirring my iced tea, "but there's something you should know before you decide." I slid my phone across the table, open to text messages between Brian and Sarah from 8 months ago. Messages I discovered in my digital excavation of his accounts. Nothing explicitly sexual, but unmistakably flirtatious, full of inside jokes and late-night exchanges that crossed the boundaries of married friendship. Sarah's face drained of color. Michael looked from the phone to his wife, confusion turning to understanding. "It never went beyond texts," I said quietly, "but it shows a pattern. You weren't the only friend, Sarah, just the only one who didn't take him up on his suggestions." The revelation accomplished exactly what I intended. It transformed their uncomfortable neutrality into active allegiance to me. By evening, our entire social circle would know that Brian's betrayal extended beyond just me and into their own marriages and relationships. His support system would crumble from within. The third strike targeted the narrative itself. Through Lauren, I arranged a family meeting ostensibly to discuss how to move forward as a family in the wake of the scandal. Everyone would be there. My parents, Lauren, her husband Robert, their younger children, and crucially, Hannah. The gathering took place at my parents' home, neutral territory where no one could easily escape. When I arrived, the tension was palpable. Hannah sat apart from everyone, eyes downcast while my parents maintained a stony silence, broken only by necessary pleasantries. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing before my assembled family. "I know this is difficult, but I believe in facing things directly." I turned to Hannah. "You've told everyone that you fell in love with Brian, that it just happened. That's the story you're holding on to justify your actions." She nodded slightly, her eyes defiant despite her submissive posture. "That's not the whole truth," I continued, opening the folder I'd brought with me. "Brian has a pattern, Hannah. You weren't special. You were convenient." I distributed copies of documents I'd compiled. Credit card statements showing gifts purchased for multiple women, hotel receipts, fragments of text conversations with dates, clearly visible, all meticulously organized, all damning in their implications. "This isn't love, Hannah. This is what Brian does. He finds vulnerable women, makes them feel special, and adds them to his collection. Before you, there was his assistant. Before her, a client, all while married to me." The color drained from her face as she looked through the evidence. "This doesn't mean he doesn't love me," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. A tremor of pity slipped past my anger for the briefest moment as I watched her world collapse in real time. Her breathing turned shallow, her knuckles white as she clutched the papers like they might anchor her to something solid. I wanted to hate her, but I could almost see the naive girl who had once looked up to me, now shattered, her illusions dissolving with every word I spoke. My mother, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Hannah, look at the dates. Look at when he was buying gifts for these other women. Some of these overlap with when you say your relationship began." Hannah's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. I watched the realization dawn on her face. The special moments she thought they shared hadn't been special at all. They had been part of a routine, a playbook Brian had refined through practice. "There's more," I said, gentler now, "but I think this is enough for today. I didn't do this to hurt you, Hannah. I did it because you deserve to know who you've thrown away your relationship with your family for." As I left my parents' house that evening, Lauren followed me to my car. "Was that all true?" she asked quietly. "About the other women?" "Every word," I replied. The only thing unique about Hannah was that she was family. That made her both more taboo and more accessible. Lauren hugged me tightly. "What you did in there, it was merciful in a way. Better she knows now than years from now when she's invested even more." I nodded, thinking of the rest of my plan, the parts I hadn't shared with anyone. "It's not about punishment anymore. It's about truth." Oh, but that wasn't entirely honest. It was still about punishment, just a more sophisticated form than simple revenge. The final phase came 3 days later, after Brian had been placed on administrative leave from his firm pending an ethics investigation. After most of our friends had publicly sided with me. After Hannah had disappeared to a friend's apartment, unable to face her family or defend her choices. I texted Brian. "We need to talk about the divorce. Come to the house tomorrow at 7 p.m. Just you." His response was immediate. "I'll be there. Thank you, Jessica." When he arrived, I was sitting calmly at our dining room table, a single folder before me, 2 glasses of wine poured. He looked haggard, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. "Good, Jessica," he began, his voice conciliatory. "Thank you for agreeing to talk these past weeks." "Sit down, Brian," I interrupted. "This isn't a reconciliation." He sat across from me, eyes fixed on the folder. "Is that the divorce agreement?" "No, it's what happens if we don't reach an agreement on my terms." I pushed the folder toward him. "Inside is everything. I've gathered the financial misconduct at your firm." "Yes, that was me. The evidence of your serial infidelity that's now circulating among our friends. Also me. The dismantling of the fiction you built with Hannah. Me again." He opened the folder with shaking hands, paging through what represented only a fraction of what I'd compiled. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because what you've experienced so far is just the preview, Brian. A taste of what happens if you fight me on the divorce." I slid a second, thinner document across the table. "This is my proposed settlement. You'll find it generous, considering the circumstances. You walk away with enough to start over. Not comfortable, but not destitute. Most importantly, your professional license remains intact, with the ethics investigation closed as a private company matter. And if I don't agree?" I smiled, taking a sip of wine. "Then the full dossier goes to the state licensing board, to the IRS, regarding certain tax discrepancies I've uncovered. And to every client whose project you compromised with your side jobs. You won't just lose your job, Brian. You'll lose your career." He stared at me, seeing me clearly, perhaps for the first time in our marriage. "Who are you?" "I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never paid enough attention to notice." I pushed the settlement agreement closer to him. "You have until tomorrow to sign. Your version of love destroyed my world, Brian. Don't test whether my version of justice will destroy yours." As he left, unsigned agreement in hand, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a hollow certainty that I had reclaimed control over my life in the most absolute way possible. The woman who had walked in on her husband and niece was gone. In her place stood someone who would never be victimized again. The next morning, the signed agreement arrived by courier. With it came a handwritten note. "You win, Jessica. I'm sorry for everything." I placed both in my attorney's folder without responding. Winning implied this was a game. It wasn't. It was survival, reconstruction, and yes, justice, served cold, with precision rather than passion. 3 months after Brian signed the divorce agreement, I sat on the terrace of a cafe in Barcelona, watching tourists stream past the Sagrada Familia. The settlement had been finalized without contest, the house sold, and my share of our assets liquidated. I'd taken an extended leave from work to travel, something Brian had always been too busy for. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Hannah's asking about you. Says she wants to apologize in person when you're back." I sipped my coffee, considering my response. Hannah had learned her lesson in perhaps the harshest way possible. After my family meeting, the carefully constructed narrative of her great love had unraveled completely. Brian, facing professional ruin and social isolation, had abandoned her, just as I predicted he would. When self-preservation became necessary, she discovered just how disposable she truly was to him. "Tell her I'll think about it," I replied. Not a yes, not a no, an acknowledgement that left the door neither open nor closed. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive Hannah. The wound of her betrayal cut differently than Brian's. He had broken vows, but she had broken blood ties. Yet watching her world collapse had brought me no satisfaction. In destroying her fantasy, I'd glimpsed the young woman beneath. Misguided, foolish, but ultimately another victim of Brian's practiced manipulation. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. Samuel Whitaker, updating me on the aftermath at the engineering firm. Brian had resigned before they could fire him, using my silence about his ethical violations as leverage to secure a neutral reference. He'd moved across the country to start over, accepting a position far below his previous status. I closed the email without responding. Brian's fate no longer concerned me, except as confirmation that my strategy had worked exactly as planned. He had escaped total professional destruction only because I'd allowed it. A mercy I sometimes questioned. That evening, I returned to my hotel and found a package waiting for me at the front desk. Inside was a small wooden box with no return address. I opened it carefully, half expecting some final message from Brian. Instead, I found the silver bracelet, the matching one he'd bought for Hannah, with a note in Lauren's handwriting. She wanted you to have this. She said it represents her mistake and your strength. Do with it what you will. I held the bracelet up to the light, examining the inscription I hadn't been able to make out in the photos. Forever starts today. A bitter laugh escaped me. Their forever had lasted less than 6 months. I walked to the balcony of my hotel room, overlooking the Mediterranean. For a moment, I considered hurling the bracelet into the sea, a dramatic gesture of finality. Instead, I placed it back in its box and tucked it away in my suitcase, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of how quickly forever can dissolve when built on deception. Over the next weeks, as I continued my solo journey through Europe, I found my thoughts shifting away from Brian and Hannah, away from the meticulous revenge I'd executed. The space they had occupied in my mind gradually filled with new experiences, new perspectives, and occasionally new people. In Rome, I met an American professor on sabbatical who invited me to join his tour group for dinner in Vienna. A local gallery owner spent an afternoon showing me hidden artistic treasures after overhearing my questions to a museum guide. None of these encounters were romantic. I wasn't ready for that. But each one reminded me that my identity extended far beyond the betrayed wife who got even. But there were nights, curled up alone in unfamiliar hotel beds, when an aching loneliness sank into my bones, a hollow reminder that I had spent years entwining my life with someone who never truly valued me. In those dark hours, the silence felt heavy and endless, and I wondered if I would ever feel whole again, or if I'd doomed myself to drift from one foreign city to the next, searching for a peace that would never come. 4 months into my travels, I received an unexpected call from Michael, my former friend and now divorced husband of Sarah. "Jessica, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Michael, no, it's fine. Is everything okay?" He sighed deeply. Sarah finally admitted everything, about Brian, about the others. "Turns out those text messages you showed us were just the tip of the iceberg." I settled onto a bench overlooking the Arno River in Florence. "I'm sorry, Michael. I never wanted to be right about that. I know. But I'm calling to thank you, actually. Your courage facing the truth head-on, refusing to look away from what was happening, it gave me the strength to do the same." He paused. "And to tell you something I should have said months ago, what you did wasn't just revenge. It was justice." After we hung up, I sat watching the river for nearly an hour, his words echoing in my mind. Justice, was that what I'd achieved? Or had I simply traded one form of pain for another, transferring my suffering to those who had caused it? The question followed me through Switzerland and into the final leg of my journey in Paris. There, on my last night abroad, I finally wrote the letter I'd been composing in my mind for months, not to Brian or Hannah, but to myself. "Dear Jessica, when you discovered their betrayal, you had 2 choices, to be destroyed by it or to transform it. You chose transformation, not just of your circumstances, but of yourself. You executed your plan with a precision that even now surprises you. You were methodical when they expected hysteria, strategic when they expected surrender. You reclaimed not just your dignity, but your power. Was it revenge? Yes. Was it justice? Perhaps. But more than either of those, it was the reclamation of your narrative, your future, your sense of self. The woman who returns home tomorrow is not the woman who left. She is stronger, clearer, unafraid of solitude or judgment. She has learned that betrayal doesn't define her. Her response to it does. So carry forward not the weight of what was done to you, nor even the weight of what you did in return. Carry only the knowledge that when tested, you discovered depths of resilience you never knew existed. Forward now, always forward." I sealed the letter and packed it with my belongings. Tomorrow, I would return to a home I'd never lived in alone, to a life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Brian and Hannah had meant to be my ending. Instead, they had become merely a difficult chapter in a story that continued to unfold. As my plane crossed the Atlantic the next day, I realized the most unexpected outcome of my revenge. In dismantling the lives of those who had betrayed me, I had inadvertently constructed something new for myself. A life defined not by who had loved or left me, but by my own resilience, wisdom, and capacity for reinvention. The greatest revenge wasn't what I did to them. It was what I refused to let their betrayal do to me. 1 year to the day after I caught Brian and Hannah together, I stood in the garden of my new home, pruning roses in the late afternoon sun. The house was smaller than the one Brian and I had shared, but entirely mine. From the paint colors to the furniture to the flourishing garden that had become my unexpected passion. The divorce settlement had left me financially secure. My career had advanced through a promotion I'd earned while rebuilding my life, and the acute pain of betrayal had mellowed into something more like a scar than an open wound. Present, but no longer debilitating. I thought about the journey of the past year. From the shock of discovery, through the cold calculation of revenge, to the gradual reconstruction of a life I hadn't planned but now cherished. The metamorphosis hadn't been linear. There were still nights when anger resurfaced, days when memories ambushed me in quiet moments, but those instances grew rarer. As time passed, news of Brian reached me occasionally through mutual acquaintances. He had struggled professionally after his move, the whispers of ethical misconduct following him. Despite the neutral reference, his new position hadn't lasted, something about not being a good culture fit. Last I heard, he was working independently, his client list modest, his former ambitions scaled back by necessity rather than choice. Hannah had taken longer to contact me directly. 6 months after my return, she'd sent a handwritten letter, 12 pages of apology, explanation, and tentative questions about the possibility of reconciliation. I'd read it twice before placing it in a drawer, unready to respond, but unwilling to discard this evidence of her remorse. 2 months later, we met at a neutral cafe, not unlike the one where I'd confronted her mother at the beginning of my revenge. She looked both older and younger, somehow. The artificial sophistication she'd affected during her affair with Brian, replaced by a more authentic maturity born of genuine regret. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said after an awkward silence. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, what it meant, how inexcusable it was." "What do you understand exactly?" I asked, my voice calm. She met my eyes directly for the first time. That I betrayed not just you, but myself. That I let him convince me what we were doing was special, when it was just calculated. That I threw away my integrity, my family relationships, my self-respect for someone who never valued any of those things in himself, let alone in me. I nodded, surprised by the clarity of her insight. And now I'm trying to rebuild, with my mom, with school. She'd returned to complete her degree, moving back home with Lauren under what I imagined were humbling circumstances. "I don't expect to be part of your life again. I just needed you to know that what you did, exposing the truth about Brian, about all of it, it was harsh, but it was necessary. You saved me from wasting years on a lie." I hadn't anticipated gratitude as the outcome of my revenge. The realization disarmed me, shifting something fundamental in how I viewed what I'd done. As I cut the final roses of the afternoon, adding them to my basket, I reflected on that conversation with Hannah. My revenge had been meticulous, designed to dismantle the fantasy they'd constructed and expose the reality beneath. What I hadn't anticipated was how that same process would work on me, stripping away the illusion of my perfect marriage to reveal truths I'd been unwilling to see. Brian's betrayal hadn't happened in a vacuum. Our marriage had been hollowing out for years before Hannah entered the picture. Not justifying their affair, but contextualizing it in ways I'd initially refused to acknowledge. The signs had been there. His emotional distance, my growing independence, our diverging priorities disguised as temporary circumstances. The revenge I'd executed with such precision had been as much about regaining control as seeking justice. In the aftermath of betrayal, I'd needed to demonstrate, to them, to myself, to everyone, that I wasn't a victim to be pitied, but a force to be reckoned with. And I'd succeeded. Perhaps too well. I carried my basket of roses inside, arranging them in a vase on the dining table where I now ate alone, but not lonely. Tonight, Lauren was coming for dinner, our relationship strengthened rather than destroyed by the crucible we'd endured. Later this week, I had plans with new friends made since the divorce, people who knew me as I was now, rather than as half of a failed marriage. The woman who had discovered her husband with her niece no longer existed. In her place stood someone more complex, someone capable of calculated vengeance, but also of compassion, of resilience, of growth beyond the identities others had assigned to her. If Brian and Hannah could see me now, would they recognize what their betrayal had ultimately created? The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to deceive me, they had forced me to find a truth about myself I might never have discovered otherwise. The greatest revenge wasn't in the carefully orchestrated consequences I'd arranged for them. It was in my refusal to let their actions define the rest of my story. They had written themselves into my life as villains, but I had edited the narrative, reducing them to supporting characters in a tale that was ultimately about my own transformation. As the setting sun cast long shadows through my garden, I raised a glass to the woman I had become, forged in betrayal, tempered by revenge, but defined by neither. The worst thing that had ever happened to me had led to the person I was most proud to be. Dear friend, if you find yourself standing in the wreckage of something you thought would last forever, remember this: life doesn't break you without also giving you the chance to rebuild stronger. The Stoics teach us that what matters most is not what happens to us, but how we choose to respond. I learned that even the deepest betrayal can become the forge for resilience, the spark for transformation, if you refuse to let bitterness win. Your worth is never defined by someone else's lies or cruelty. It's measured by your courage to face the truth, your grace to rise above it, and your strength to keep moving forward when your world has fallen apart. So if today you feel lost or defeated, know this: your story isn't over. Every ending writes the beginning of something new, and you have the power to shape it. Keep going, keep growing. You are stronger than you think. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more powerful journeys like this one. Your support means the world to us.